It was a late autumn morning in the Eyrie when Jon Arryn finally succumbed to his lingering illness. No scribbled messages were sent, no desperate ravens to Winterfell, no whispered truths about the seed not matching the root. He died quietly, a tired old man, and the kingdom he served so faithfully would never know the final question that haunted him. Far in the north, Ned Stark remained untouched by the creeping chaos that had begun to fester in King's Landing. The call never came, so life in Winterfell rolled on with the tranquil order of tradition. Robb trained in the yard with the calm confidence of a boy who still had time to become a man. Arya chased cats and sparred with a wooden sword under Jon Snow's amused gaze. Sansa dreamt of songs and noble knights, unaware of how fortunate she was to still be surrounded by snow and stone instead of lies and silk. But the south had started to rot. King Robert Baratheon sat upon his iron throne, swollen with drink and sorrow, growing more restless each day. Without Jon Arryn, his hand and friend of 30 years, Robert was a ship without a rudder, crashing into the rocky court politics that Cersei mastered so effortlessly. Cersei wasted no time. She appointed her cousin, Lancel, to Robert's a cup and slipped deeper into her own ambitions. With Jon Arryn gone and no whisper of doubt about her children, her confidence swelled. She had played a dangerous game and won for now. Littlefinger, watching from the shadows, adjusted his game accordingly. With Ned Stark out of reach, Peter Baelish turned his silver tongue toward the Tyrells. He whispered about the queens, a power, about how quickly roses wilt under wildfire. Slowly he began sowing dissent among those not yet loyal to Lannister rule. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon, brooding on Dragonstone, kept his suspicions to himself. He had begun to connect the dots, just as Jon Arryn had, but lacking both the proof and the allies. He remained silent. He penned one letter to the Maesters of Old Town, requesting a thorough genealogical scroll, but it was buried under other inquiries and dismissed without urgency. In the shadows of King's Landing, Varys watched the Queen with narrowed eyes. He had expected a different game to unfold after Jon Arryn's death. A game that might include Ned Stark's honor clashing against Cersei's cunning. But Ned remained in the north, and that silence worried him more than any army. Without Ned's meddling, Cersei moved freely, and a free Cersei was dangerous. Back in Winterfell, the days were growing shorter. Jon Snow stood atop the wall, now a man of the Night's Watch. There was still peace here, but there was also the first stirring of unease. Rangers disappeared more often. Wildlings whispered of things moving in the deep woods. But no one in. The South cared about ghost stories from frozen lands. Bran still climbed the towers, free and bold, since the Queen and her brother had never visited Winterfell. His legs still worked. His dreams were still innocent. But innocence was dying. Elsewhere, Robert's fatal hunt still came, as it always had to. But this time, with no Ned to write the will or contest Cersei's claim, the transition of power was bloodless. Joffrey was crowned with golden curls and a smirk, and Cersei became the true ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. No war, no rebellion, just silence. Sansa never watched her father's head fall. Arya never had to run with a sword too big for her hands. Robb never wore armor or buried his friends. But that peace was a thin veil, and beneath it, the realm began to splinter. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen's child was born under the Red Comet. With Viserys dead and her dragons alive, she believed destiny had called her. She began to move, west with the calm rage of someone who had already lost everything, and still the north slept. It was Maester Luwin who first noticed the shift. Letters from the capital came slower, colder. Whispers in the marketplace began to include words like new taxes, gold cloaks, and disappearances. Still, Ned held to the belief that it was not his place. He had buried his old friend Robert's bad decisions for years. What more harm could a few more indulgences cause? He would learn. The whole North would. because Jon Arryn never sent the Raven, and the game had changed. The air in Winterfell grew colder earlier than expected that year. Some said it was a sign the gods were restless, others just blamed the usual northern chill. But the wind carried more than cold. It carried omens. Ned Stark stood on the battlements more often, silent, watching the tree line as though waiting for something. He couldn't explain the unease, he just knew something was off. News from the south came slower, and when it did, it was dressed in careful words. Sir Barristan Selmy had been retired. Gracefully, they said. Lord Renly had vanished from court. Littlefinger had been made master of coin. Varys remained, though his letters felt colder. And Joffrey had been crowned without so much as a murmur of dissent. But it was Tyrion Lannister's name that began to appear more frequently. In those letters, Tyrion, not Jaime. As acting hand, the imp was said to be clever, shrewd, and ruthless. Yet still, no word of challenge came from the Stormlands or Dragonstone. Stannis was quiet, too quiet. Then one morning a raven arrived. From the Eyrie, not from Jon Arryn, but from Lysa Tully. Her words were unsteady, the writing rushed and fevered. She claimed the Lannisters had murdered her husband, and that she feared for her life, and that of her son. She demanded her sister Catelyn come at once. Ned frowned as he read the message aloud. He didn't believe in blind accusations. But Lysa's fear felt real, and if the Lannisters were behind Jon's death, why? What truth had Jon found? Catelyn urged caution, but her Tully blood stirred. She missed her sister, and she feared the court. After a heated discussion, she rode to the Eyrie with a handful of guards, leaving Ned to keep peace in Winterfell and watch over their children. The absence of Catelyn made things heavier. Robb had grown more solemn, less boyish. He watched his father closely now, sensing his worry. Arya began sneaking into the woods with Nymeria, claiming she was training to survive when everything goes wrong. Sansa remained oblivious, dreaming of a wedding she believed would one day happen at court, under banners of gold and red. Then came the second raven, this time from the Wall. Jon Snow's writing was brief, clipped. A ranging party had vanished. Benjen Stark was missing. They had found a corpse that walked and bled black ice. The Night's Watch was worried, but no one in the south listened. Ned stared at the letter long after the fire had died in the hearth. There were too many warnings now, too many unanswered questions, and still no war, no rebellion, no justice. At King's Landing, Cersei wore her crown behind Joffrey's smirk. She had full control, and the small council danced to her tune. She had learned from her father how to play the long game, and with no Ned Stark to stumble through her plans. She had years to move her pieces. But power breeds paranoia, and Cersei began seeing shadows behind every curtain. She had Sir Hugh of the Vale murdered in a quiet duel. She had Lord Varys's birds followed. She had Grand Maester Pycelle write letters in secret, only to burn them afterward. The more she won, the more afraid she became, because she knew the truth could still leak, and if it did, it wouldn't be Ned Stark she feared. It would be Stannis Baratheon. And so quietly, a plan formed. Kill Stannis before he could rise. Assassinate him on Dragonstone with the help of mercenaries and gold cloaks. End the threat before it had breath. Tyrion disagreed, of course. But Cersei had grown too confident in her hold on the throne. She ignored his counsel and pressed forward. Meanwhile, in the Eyrie, Catelyn Tully Stark arrived to find her sister nearly unrecognizable. Lysa was paranoid, shaking, and surrounded by guards. The boy, Robin, was sickly and spoiled. But when Catelyn asked for proof of the Lannisters' guilt, Lysa showed her nothing, only more fear and suspicion. "You must convince Ned to fight," Lysa whispered. "He must bring the North. He must avenge Jon." But Catelyn knew her husband. He would never march without truth. And she had found none. Back in Winterfell, another raven arrived. This one bore the royal seal. It summoned the Warden of the North to King's Landing, not to serve as hand, but to pledge loyalty to King Joffrey formally, and to offer one of his children as a ward of the crown. Ned Stark stared at the parchment for a long time. His silence felt like thunder. The game had reached his doorstep. Ned Stark rode alone to the Godswood that night, not with sword nor cloak, just the old weight of his family's honor wrapped around his shoulders. The royal summons still burned in his pocket, but not as hot as the decision it demanded. He knelt beneath the heart tree. The face in the bark stared back, solemn, unmoved. He whispered prayers not for guidance. He already knew the answer, but for strength. King Joffrey wanted a Stark child, a hostage. That's what it truly was beneath all the silken words and royal banners. A leash, not a bond. It wasn't unprecedented, but it was rare for the crown to reach so boldly into the north and yank on its lords. It felt like a test. Ned hated tests that came wrapped in red and gold. The next morning, he broke the news to Catelyn through a raven sent to the Eyrie. He told her he would never hand over one of their children. Not to Joffrey, not to Cersei. Let them make of it what they would. The North would not be treated like a kennel of pets. Robb, standing nearby, heard everything. And for the first time the boy asked, "Would you go to war if they demanded more?" Ned didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because saying it aloud would change something in his son forever. And Robb deserved a little more. Time before that happened. Weeks passed. The North received no reply, no ravens from the capital, no soldiers at their gates. Only silence. Then the silence shattered. News came from the Stepstones. Stannis Baratheon's ship had been attacked en route to Storm's End. The Lord of Dragonstone was presumed dead. No survivors, no body, just fire and wreckage. Ned read the news with dread. He did not believe in coincidences anymore. Catelyn returned to Winterfell not long after. She arrived shaken, her horse thin and wet with sweat. Lisa had refused to take her back in after their argument. She brought with her not proof, but a theory. If Jon Arryn had been murdered, and now Stannis was lost at sea, then someone was tying up loose ends, someone in red and gold. Ned began writing, quietly, to the Tullys, the Arryn bannermen, even the old lords of Bear Island. Not a call to arms, not yet, but a call for awareness. If the South thought the North would remain docile, they needed to think again. But trouble came faster than expected. A small group of gold cloaks arrived under the command of Sir Meryn Trant. They carried a second royal order. This one was not a request, it was a demand. The king insisted on the North's obedience. The warden must travel to King's Landing at once. Failure to comply would be seen as an act of rebellion. Ned greeted them with dignity, but no warmth. "You may rest and return with my reply," he said calmly, "but I will not leave my lands to bend knee to a boy who has not earned my trust." Sir Meryn sneered but said nothing. The cloaks stayed 2 nights and left at dawn. Ned watched them go, knowing this wasn't the end. That evening, Maester Luwin came quietly into the solar with a sealed letter. "It's from the Wall," he said. Ned broke the wax. Jon Snow had written again. Another ranger lost. The dead were walking more often now. Whispers of white shadows in the trees. Sam Tarly had seen one with his own eyes and nearly died. They begged for more men, more steel, more attention. Ned sat in silence. He was being pulled in 2 directions, south and north, but the danger creeping through the trees of the far north felt truer than the petty crowns and cloaks in the capital. "The realm is asleep," he muttered, "and it's sleeping through a storm." Catelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then wake it, Ned, before we all drown." But to wake a realm asleep in the comfort of power meant stirring beasts that had grown fat and deadly. And if they came north, they wouldn't stop at ravens and threats. Ned Stark wrote one final letter that night, Not to the king, not to Cersei, but to Jon Snow. He told him to prepare the wall, fortify it, and if the time came, the North would stand behind it, not just as watchers, but as warriors. He sealed it in black wax, because the war that was coming wouldn't be about thrones or titles. It would be about survival. Winterfell never slept. Quite the same after that. The nights grew longer. The howling wind clawed at the windows like a warning. Ned Stark spent more time in the war room, staring at maps he had hoped to never use. His old war instincts, dulled by years of peace, began to stir with reluctant clarity. Then came the fire. A raven from White Harbor brought the news. A Lannister ship had docked under the guise of trade. By morning the dockyards were ablaze. 3 Manderley guards were dead, and the ship had vanished with no explanation. Lord Wyman sent no demands, only a cold message. "The South tests us. We will not bend." Ned read it twice. The wolf in him growled. That same week, word arrived from King's Landing. Renly Baratheon had vanished. No witnesses, no trails, no bodies. Rumors ranged from wild hunts to dark magic. Officially, the Crown claimed he had abandoned his post and fled. But more and more, it seemed the Lannisters weren't just consolidating power, they were erasing it. Catelyn, now fully convinced of a deeper conspiracy, called upon her father's bannermen. Riverlands stood ready. But it was the Raven from the Dreadfort that truly confirmed the shift. Rose Bolton's message was simple. Winter approaches. We sharpen our blades. That was the North's way of saying, we are watching. But war was not declared, not yet, because Ned still hoped the truth could rise without blood. He had one move left, one man who might listen. Ned sent ravens to Lord Tywin Lannister himself. It was a risky gamble. Tywin had long been silent, pulling strings from Casterly Rock while letting his children dance in the capital, but he was no fool. If he saw that Cersei's reckless moves threatened the realm's stability, his legacy, he might rein her in. He never replied. 3 weeks later, ravens arrived from the Crown. The seal was Joffrey's, the message short, Lord Eddard Stark is hereby charged with treason for refusal to honor the king's command. The North is to send hostages, men and coin, or face the Iron Throne's justice. That same day, a bounty was placed on Catelyn Stark's head. A southern lord had accused her of conspiring to sow rebellion. It was baseless, but it was loud, a signal. And yet, the true war still hadn't started. Not until the attack on Moat Cailin. A group of southern sellswords disguised as merchants slipped through the neck. They attacked the garrison in the dead of night. Dozens died. The hold was nearly lost, if not for Howland Reed's men, cruel in their marshy cunning, who ambushed the attackers with poison and drowned them in bogs. That was the last straw. Ned Stark called the banners. He did not roar it through the streets or declare it with pride. He summoned the lords in the old way, raven by raven, oath by oath. The Greatjon, Manderley, Glover, Karstark, even the Flinty. Umbers answered, quietly at first, then louder. The North had not forgotten how to fight. They had merely been waiting for the call. Robb stood at his father's side now, not as a boy, but as a man learning to carry the weight of command. His eyes were sharper, his voice steadier. "We ride for the neck first," Ned told him, "then south." "And if they send more gold cloaks?" Robb asked. "Then we send them back in pieces." In the crypts, Ned visited Lyanna's tomb. Before his departure, he knelt alone, speaking only to the silence. "They will come for our blood, sister, for power, for control. But the real threat is in the north, and they won't see it until it's too late." That same night, Jon Snow's Raven returned. "We have seen the dead walk in numbers. We need fire obsidian men soon, or not even the wall will hold." Ned read the letter by torchlight. His heart was heavy. War in the south, death in the north, and he stood between both. But still he marched, for Winterfell, for the wall. For the realm, too blind to see the enemy rising beyond their games of thrones, and for the letter Jon Arryn never lived long enough to send. The army of the North moved with a quiet fury. It wasn't the kind of campaign that sang through minstrels or echoed with fanfare. This wasn't war for glory. It was a march of grim inevitability. The wolves of the North remembered their ancestors and followed their warden with solemn faces and sharpened blades. From Carhold to Bear Island, from the white shores of White Harbour to the frost-bitten flanks of Last Hearth, the banners flew, grey dire wolves against white. And at the front of it all was Eddard Stark. He wore no crown. He spoke no grand declarations. He only said this: "We ride for justice. We ride because the South brings fire to our home." Moat Catelyn was reinforced first, turned into an iron chokehold. The Neck was a fortress now, and Howland Reed's marsh warriors slithered in and out of swamps, intercepting any who dared cross into their lands without permission. Riverrun was next. Catelyn rode with her father's men to meet Ned, and their reunion was one of both relief and sorrow. The price of clarity had arrived. Their sons would now ride into war. Robb Stark stood taller among the campfires, his direwolf Grey Wind prowling at his side. The other lords looked to him, whispered of the young wolf, and many saw in him the beginning of something new. But Robb's eyes stayed on his father, always on Ned. He was still learning, still watching. Across the south, Cersei's reaction was swift but misguided. She sent ravens to the Reach and the Westerlands, demanding reinforcement. But Tywin Lannister, ever calculating, hesitated. War with the North was costly, and if he rushed to defend a boy king wearing a golden crown with a bastard's blood, he risked exposing a deeper rot. For once, Tywin chose silence, and Cersei felt her power tremble. To mask that fear, she turned to violence. The gold cloaks began rounding up those with northern blood in King's Landing, merchants, squires, wandering knights. The city became a furnace of suspicion. Riots flared, food grew scarce, and through it all, Joffrey preened atop the throne, breaking toys he didn't understand. Tyrion Lannister returned from a diplomatic journey to find the capital ready to boil over. He confronted Cersei in her chambers, his tone sharper than ever before. "You're carving your own throat with that boy's crown," he hissed. Cersei only smiled, wine in hand, "Then let me bleed golden." Meanwhile, Daenerys Targaryen sailed west. Her dragons were no longer whispers, they were flame and sky. Her ships landed on the shores of Dorne, and to her surprise, the Martells welcomed her. Old wounds had not healed, Viserys was forgotten, but the death of Ilya Martell still burned in their blood. Dawn declared for Daenerys. The realm now fractured into pieces too jagged to hold. At the wall, the Night's Watch stood thinner with each passing day. Rangers disappeared like smoke. Jon Snow patrolled endlessly, eyes fixed on the woods beyond the frost. He had seen the Whites. He had killed one, and still the South remained blind, until the Raven came. It carried the Stark sigil and a single line penned by Lord Eddard himself. "The wall must hold. We are coming." Back at Riverrun, the Lords of the North and Riverlands gathered in the Great Hall. Great Jon Umber slammed his fist against the table. "They call us rebels!" he bellowed. "Then let us give them a rebellion worth fearing." Many roared in agreement, but Ned raised a hand and silence followed. "We are not rebels," he said, his voice calm but hard. "We are loyal men defending our homes. We do not fight to take the throne. We fight to keep our families safe from those who mistake silence for weakness." Then he looked to Robb. "But the day may come when this boy must wear a crown, not for conquest, but because no one else will deserve it." Robb's eyes widened. He had not expected that, but he nodded quietly. The next morning they began the march south, not for King's Landing, not yet, but for Harrenhal. The monstrous castle stood as a symbol of the realm's bloodiest power plays. Ned intended to take it, to make a statement. The North would not cower, and it would be their foothold if war deepened. But as the army rode through the Riverlands, word reached them from the wall again, more than a letter this time. A rider, half dead, frostbitten, eyes wide with horror. "They come," he rasped. "The dead come. An army, thousands, behind." The trees behind the wall. The firelight flickered across Ned's face as he listened. He felt the air grow colder, not from the wind, but from something deeper. War with the South was now just one front. The real war was waking. The dead marched south. Jon Snow stood atop the wall and watched the woods churn beneath the moonlight. They moved in silence. No war horns, no banners, no voices. Just a shifting, endless sea of ice-pale flesh and blue-burning eyes. He had sent ravens to every great house. He didn't know who would listen, but he knew who was coming, and he knew they would not be enough. At Harrenhal, Ned Stark stood in the ruins of a kingdom built by fire and ambition. He had taken the cursed castle without blood. Its last Lannister garrison had fled at the mere sight of the northern host. Ravens arrived daily with rumors and questions. Was he crowning Robb? Was he taking the throne? He responded to none of them. He had sent only one message: the wall must not fall. All else is dust. Robb trained daily now, but his eyes held a fire deeper than battle. He had seen the wounded Night's Watch messenger collapse in front of him. He had seen the horror in the man's eyes. The boy who once dreamed of southern tournaments now dreamt of frozen corpses and dying stars. Then the final piece fell into place. A raven arrived from Old Town. The Meisters had confirmed what Jon Arryn had died chasing, what Stannis had suspected, and what Ned had quietly refused to believe until now. Joffrey Baratheon was no Baratheon. The line was broken, the blood illegitimate, the throne stolen. And now, war was not a choice, it was a duty. Tywin Lannister finally moved. His host surged out of the Westerlands like a lion at last unchained. His delay was over. Cersei's recklessness had cost them time, but he intended to end the North's campaign before it reached King's Landing. With 50,000 men, he descended upon the Riverlands, and Ned Stark stood between them. He did not retreat. He sent Catelyn and Arya to the Vale, Sansa to the north. Then he stood beside his son and his bannermen and met Tywin at the edge of the God's Eye Lake. The Battle of the Ashfields raged for 3 days. Steel clanged and blood soaked the frozen earth. Grey wind tore through Lannister lines. The Great Jon lost 2 fingers but took down 5 knights. Sir Brynden Tully fought like a storm reborn. But the Lannisters were relentless, and Ned knew. They were only buying time, until the sky opened, dragonfire. It fell from the clouds like the breath of gods. Black wings swept low as Daenerys Stormborn descended upon Westeros, not as a fugitive, but as its burning reckoning. She came with dawn at her back and fire at her command. Her dragons scorched the Lannister rear, breaking their ranks in seconds. Soldiers fled, screaming names of gods that would not answer. Ned watched the flames with horror and awe. The fire was too wild, too hungry. And yet, for the first time, the South looked vulnerable. When the battle ended, Tywin Lannister was gone, vanished into the chaos. Thousands dead, the Riverlands blackened, but the real war still waited. A raven came the next day, short, desperate. The wall is breached. Ned did not sleep that night. He sat with Robb, alone in the ruins of Harrenhal, watching the cold wind swirl through shattered towers. "All our wars," Ned whispered, "were for shadows." Robb said nothing. Then came another rider, half-frozen, bearing the black of the Night's Watch. Jon Snow had crossed the ruins of Eastwatch by the sea. He brought no army, just stories. "The Night King rides. He has giants, dead direwolves, even men once loyal to Winterfell. The wall is broken. The north is next." Ned rose slowly. There was no time for crowns, no time for thrones. He turned to the remaining lords of the north and Riverlands. Send ravens to every corner, not for allegiance, for survival. Tell them the truth. The dead have come, and this time no one is safe. Even Daenerys, with all her fire and fury, paused when she heard of the breach. Her dragons could burn cities, but could they stop death itself? Winter had arrived, not in name, not in weather, but in force, and it carried no banners, wore no colors. It simply came. Epilogue. Jon Arryn had died believing truth was enough, that noble men, given facts, would act. But in his silence, the realm had plunged into quiet rot. When truth finally came, it came too late to prevent war, too late to stop blood, but perhaps not too late to save the living. Eddard Stark marched north once more, not as warden, not as rebel, but as a father, a brother, and a man who finally saw the game for what it truly was. Not thrones, not power, survival.